Aldrich Voss had never made a mistake he could not fix. That was what his father had told him, standing in the great hall of Ironstone Keep on the day of his coronation. A king does not undo his choices, the old man had said, placing the iron crown on his son's head. A king makes his choices, and he stands behind them, and the world bends to fit. Aldrich had believed this for 32 years. He had built an entire kingdom on the back of that belief. He did not understand, until it was far too late, that there is a difference between the world bending and the world breaking. His name was known across every territory between the three mountain ranges. Aldrich Voss, Alpha King of Veldramore, the strongest wolf in 5 generations, the king who had ended the border wars in 2 seasons, who had tripled the kingdom's trade routes, who could silence a room simply by walking into it. Wolves who had never met him spoke of him with a kind of careful respect, the sort reserved for storms and deep rivers. You did not challenge a storm, you simply hoped it passed over you gently. And then the moon goddess sent him Seraphine Graves. She came from the eastern border clans, a people who had lived at the edge of Veldramore's territory for generations, respected, but never fully welcomed into the heart of the kingdom. She was not powerful by any rank the court recognized. She held no title, commanded no army, sat at no noble table. She was simply a silver-eyed wolf from the borderlands with quiet hands and a voice that never rose above what was necessary. The mate bond announced itself on the night of the blood solstice, in front of the entire court. It was unmistakable, the kind of pull that moves through a wolf's chest like a key turning in a lock that has never been opened before. Even the most skeptical nobles in the room saw it happen. They saw the king go still. They saw the silver-eyed woman from the borderlands raise her eyes to meet his. They saw something move between the two of them that had no name in any language spoken at court. The moon goddess did not make these choices carelessly. Everyone knew this. For 3 months, Aldrich allowed himself to believe in it. He was not a man comfortable with softness, but Seraphine did not ask him to be soft. She asked him, in her quiet way, only to be honest. She sat beside him at council. She listened carefully. She never pushed for power or position, which made the nobles who expected her to push for both deeply uncomfortable, in a way they could not easily explain. She was exactly what Aldrich had never known he needed, and so, naturally, he destroyed it. It began with letters. Seraphine found them by accident, or perhaps not by accident, since she moved through the keep with an attention that most people mistook for shyness. She had been in the records room, searching for old border clan agreements that she hoped to use as precedent for a trade proposal, when she found the sealed correspondence tucked between 2 ledgers that had not been touched in years. The crests on the letters belonged to 3 noble houses. The contents, once she had read them carefully, described a long and carefully organized system in which clan tribute, money and goods that should have reached the kingdom's treasury, had been quietly redirected. The man at the center of it was Lord Caston. Lord Caston, who had been at Aldrich's side since childhood. Lord Caston, whose family had supported the Voss line before Aldrich was born. Lord Caston, who sat to the king's right at every council meeting, and whose opinion Aldrich had trusted without examination for over a decade. Seraphine brought the letters to Aldrich that same night. She came alone, without ceremony, without witnesses, out of respect for him. She laid the letters on the table between them, and told him what she had found, and where she had found it. She was calm. She did not exaggerate. She simply presented what was there and waited for him to respond. Aldrich read the letters. He held them for a long time. Then he placed them carefully in the fireplace and watched them burn. He told himself he had reasons. Caston was old blood. Caston's loyalty had been proven over decades. A mate bond that had existed for 3 months could not be trusted the way 30 years of loyalty could be trusted. The border clans had always been ambitious, always looking for ways to move themselves closer to the center of power. Seraphine had found these letters conveniently, in a room she had no clear reason to be in. It was possible, he told himself it was possible, that this was a move, a play for influence, a way to remove a rival. He told himself many things. He did not fully believe any of them. The exile decree came 3 days later. Aldrich read it aloud in the great hall, in front of the full court, because a king who makes a choice must be seen making it. Seraphine stood in the center of the room and listened to every word. When it was finished, she looked at him once, just once, with those silver eyes that held no hatred and no plea, only a quiet sadness that was somehow harder to bear than either. And then she walked out through the iron gates of Ironstone Keep. She took nothing. She asked for nothing. She simply left. The court stood in silence long after the gates had closed behind her. The mate bond did not break. It could not break. That was not how these things worked. Instead, it tore, the way a wound tears when something is pulled from it too quickly, leaving both sides raw and open and wrong. Aldrich felt it immediately, and spent the following days pretending he did not. The first sign that something had shifted came 3 days later, when Elder Maren arrived at the keep at dawn. Elder Maren was the keeper of the moon shrine, a woman so old that even the oldest wolves in the kingdom could not remember a time when she had looked young. She was not a dramatic person. She did not make speeches or declarations. She walked to the front threshold of Ironstone Keep, placed her ceremonial staff across the doorway, a gesture every wolf in the kingdom understood to mean, "I withdraw my blessing from this house," and then turned and walked away without a word. By the end of the week, 6 more elders had done the same. Then the sacred wolves disappeared. The sacred wolves were ancient. 3 enormous white wolves who had lived in Veldremore's forests for longer than any record could trace. Their presence in a king's territory was the moon goddess's mark of approval, silent and absolute. Pups were brought to see them at naming ceremonies. Warriors whispered their names before riding into danger. They could not be called or commanded. They simply were, the way certain mountains simply are, permanent and necessary and assumed. Within 2 weeks of Seraphine's exile, all 3 were gone. Scouts followed their tracks to the eastern border of the territory, where the prince stopped as cleanly as if the wolves had stepped through a door in the air. No signs of struggle, no blood, no explanation. Only their absence, which spread through the kingdom like cold water moving through stone, slowly, and then everywhere at once. Aldrich ordered that no one speak of it. People spoke of nothing else. Meanwhile, the border clans withdrew their trade agreements. They did it quietly, without announcement or confrontation. Goods simply stopped arriving. Routes simply stopped being maintained. The highland passes that Veldremore depended on for winter supplies became difficult, then dangerous. Raiders who had been kept in check for years grew bolder. And at court, with Seraphine gone, there was no one near enough to Aldrich to tell him things he did not want to hear. Lord Castan filled that silence completely. His voice became the only voice. His counsel became the only counsel. Inside Aldrich, the damage moved more slowly but cut deeper. The torn mate bond did not let him rest. It was not pain, exactly. It was something worse than pain. It was the constant physical awareness of an absence, the way a body knows, even in sleep, when something essential has been removed. He slept less. He ate without tasting. His wolf, once a focused and formidable presence, grew agitated, then went quiet in a way that was far more worrying than agitation. A wolf that stops fighting is not a wolf that has found peace. 4 months after the exile, Lord Castan's own scribe came forward. The young man's name was Perel, and he had spent 4 months carrying the weight of what he knew. He had watched a woman who had done nothing wrong walk out of the kingdom in silence. He had watched the sacred wolves leave. He had watched the supply lines fail and the elders withdraw. He had helped record the very transactions that Seraphine had uncovered, and every day that passed made the stone of it heavier around his neck. He went to Elder Maren. He brought copies, documents he had kept, quietly, for reasons he had not fully understood at the time, but understood now. He brought records of every transaction, every redirected payment, every agreement between Lord Castan and the 3 noble houses. Maren brought them to the Great Hall. She arrived during full session, when every noble house was present. She did not ask permission. She walked to the center of the hall and placed the documents on the floor, one by one, in front of the throne. She named each crime. She named each house. She named Lord Castan, who sat 3 seats to the king's right, and who did not deny a single word she said. Then she looked at Aldrich. "You burn truth to protect comfort," she said, in the quiet voice of a woman who has lived long enough to know that quiet carries farther than shouting. "And you called it wisdom. Every wolf in this kingdom watched you do it. Now you sit in a kingdom that knows what you are." The hall was completely silent. Lord Castan was arrested before nightfall. His trial was swift, his sentencing certain. But the arrest did not undo what had been done. It only made visible the full cost of it, which was larger than any single act of justice could address. Aldrich sent riders east to find Seraphine. She was not hard to find. She had gone into the neutral territories, the lands beyond Veldremore's eastern border where no pack held dominion, and she had built something. It had started with just herself and a few other wolves who had nowhere else to go. But Seraphine had never been someone who made the people around her feel small, and that quality, it turned out, was the most powerful thing in the world. Wolves without packs had moved toward her, the way plants move toward light, not because she had commanded them to, but because something in her direction felt like safety. By the time Aldrich's riders arrived, 60 wolves lived in her settlement. She had established resource agreements with 3 neighboring factions that Veldremore had been trying and failing to court for years. She was not hiding. She was not surviving. She was building. She received the riders politely. She gave them food and warm shelter. She asked about the kingdom with what appeared to be genuine, uncomplicated interest. And when they delivered the king's message, that he wished her to return, that arrangements would be made, that the situation had changed, she thanked them, and she thought for a moment, and then she handed them a reply written in her own careful handwriting. It said, "I have no anger toward the king, but I am not something that can be recalled." The riders carried it back to Veldremore. The message moved through the kingdom faster than they did. There is a particular kind of sentence that, once heard, cannot be unheard. Not because it is cruel, but because it is simply and completely true. Every wolf in Veldremore who heard those words understood them in the same instant. They were not a rejection, they were a fact. Aldrich read the letter alone. Those who saw him in the hours afterward described the same thing, a change in his face when he finished, something settling behind his eyes that had not been there before. He had, at last, stopped arguing with what he had done. 6 months after the exile, a shepherd boy living at the edge of the eastern neutral territory woke before dawn to find 3 white wolves sitting at the boundary of Seraphine's settlement. They were still and patient in the way that very old things are still and patient. By the time the sun rose, the entire settlement had gathered at a respectful distance and was watching them in silence. The wolves remained until midday, then they circled the settlement twice, slowly, deliberately, and disappeared into the forest. They did not return to Veldremore. When the news reached Aldrich through his scouts, he was alone in the throne room. He did not summon anyone. He did not issue a statement. He sat for a long time in the chair that had held kings for generations, in the keep that his father had given him, in the kingdom that he had been told he could not break. That evening he went to the moon shrine. Elder Marin had not yet returned to it, but the ritual flame was still burning, tended by the shrine's junior keepers, who had never stopped their work regardless of what the adults above them were doing. Aldrich knelt on the stone floor. He did not perform any ceremony. He did not know what words were right for what he needed to say. He was not sure the moon goddess was listening. He was not sure he deserved to be heard. He knelt anyway. For a long time, the kingdom of Veldremore did not fall. It continued, the way things continue when they have lost something important, functional, and quieter, and never quite the same as before. The border clans returned to trade, gradually, partly from necessity, and partly because Seraphine, from her growing settlement in the east, quietly encouraged them to. She held no bitterness toward Veldremore. She had her own life now, her own responsibilities, her own people who looked to her every morning with the expectation that she would be there. She was always there. Aldrich became, in time, a more careful king. He listened better. He trusted flattery less. He made slower decisions. He kept the position of chief advisor empty for 2 full years after Castan's exile, preferring to hear many voices rather than just one. He was a good king in the end. Wolves who served him in those later years said he governed with a kind of patient seriousness, as if every decision reminded him of another decision, made long ago, that he could not take back. The sacred wolves were seen twice more during his lifetime, both times near Seraphine's settlement, which had grown by then into a full, recognized clan with its own traditions and its own future. They were never seen in Veldramore again.